Now, once you've added some frames to your page, probably the next most important tool to know about is the selection tool. That's this black tool shaped like an arrow up at the top of the tools panel. And I'm quickly actually going to click that arrow at the top of my tools panel to put myself in the two vertical column tool panel view. I prefer that view so that I can see the color options a little larger on my screen. You can see if I click the single view, the color options are a little smaller. But first I'm going to take a look at the selection tool. So I'm going to click on that black arrow up at the top. What the selection tool allows me to do is to select which of my frames or objects I want to manipulate. So if I click, you can see I get these little white boxes all around my object, or my frame. Those boxes are called handles. And if I click on those, I can drag to change the size and dimensions of my object. As I mentioned before, the Shift key will hold things proportional. So if I've drawn a rectangle here and I want to maintain these proportions, if I hold the Shift key while I drag my handle, my rectangle will stay proportional to the rectangle I've already created. There are a few different ways to select objects. I can either click directly on my object, or I can drag what's called a marquee. That's when I click and drag with my mouse, and I can select everything that that marquee touches. I'll show you that again. If I click here and drag over these 4 objects, I can see that all of these 4 objects are now selected, and that means that I can move them or change them. And because I've selected all of them at the same time, they're moving as a group. So dragging a marquee is one way to select multiple objects. The other way is to hold the Shift key while I click on my objects. And you can see that that way I can select multiple objects. I'll note the difference quickly between the selection tool and the direct selection tool. Again, those are two pretty similar sounding tools. The main difference between them is that in general, the selection tool allows you to select an entire object all at once. The direct selection tool allows you just to select a piece of an object. For example, I could select the corner point of my rectangle here, and using that direct selection tool, I can grab it and change it, where I'm just changing that single point and not the whole object all at once. So in general, the selection tool is for selecting entire objects. The direct selection tool is for selecting points or lines of objects, but not the object as a whole. I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-Z to undo that. That would be Command-Z on the Mac. Also, I can go up to Object Select, which is useful, for example, if I have overlapping objects. If I'm having a hard time selecting the object underneath my rectangle because my rectangle is overlapping it, I can go up to Object Select, and I can tell InDesign to select the next object below my current object. Let's see, Object Select, next object below. And that should move my selection to the star shape here. Once I've figured out how to use that selection tool, I can use the selection tool to click on my object and drag it with the mouse. And once that object is selection, I can also move it quite precisely. You'll notice up in the context menu, there are both x and y coordinates and width and height coordinates. I can enter whichever numbers I want within the dimensions of my page in these settings and move my object accordingly. So if I wanted to place this star at the top left-hand corner of my page in the margin, if I set my x value to 0.5 inches and my y value to 0.5 inches, you can see I've now moved the star precisely to that corner. Another way I can move my object is if I go up to the Object Transform menu and select the Move command. This will allow me to move my image by a certain my object by a certain increment. So as you can see, it offers me a horizontal and a vertical position, and also the distance.